What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Body Lock. It's your man, Ant Walker, here with some of my good friends and colleagues over at Body Lock. We got Matt Wells, we've got Pat OJ, and we've got Drake Riggs. So, of course, with Khabib's recent retirement, a lot of GOAT talk has been started up. And I know we've kind of touched on that a few times here on this channel. Everyone else has kind of touched on it too. We had the trilogy fight between Stipe and DC also that kind of bordered on these lines. Jon Jones potentially moving up to heavyweight, whatnot. There's so many things moving as far as the conversation for the greatest of all time is concerned. And this is a conversation we probably will be revisiting. But for fun, let's go ahead and visit it right now, because we do have a list compiled by the gentlemen, including myself, in front of you. And we're going to dive into it, get into some of the X's and O's, get into why we have these guys ranked the way we do. So, Matt, I'm going to start with you. Give us the top 5 fighters that you submitted for the Body Lock survey.
Number 1 on my top 5, dead or alive, Jon Bones Jones is my number 1. Number 2, George St-Pierre. Number 3, Khabib Nurmagomedov. Number 4, Amanda Nunes. And number 5, Demetrious Mighty Mouse Johnson.
All right. Strong list there. So, Pat, now up to you. What are your top 5?
All right, top 5. I'm going to go the reverse order. Flip it up a little bit. Number 5, I got arguably the greatest heavyweight of all time, Fedor Emelianenko. Number 4, I got Jon Bones Jones. Number 3, got the Spider, Anderson Silva. Number 2, I have the recently retired Khabib Nurmagomedov. And number 1, holding that number 1 spot, George St-Pierre.
All right, strong list right there. Drake, what do you have for your top 5 GOAT list?
All right. Well, let's start with number 1 here, as I am not impressed by Matt's performance. I got GSP at number 1, of course, Captain Canada himself. Then we go to number 2 with Demetrious Mighty Mouse Johnson, the longest reigning title holder, the title defense record holder in the UFC, of course. And then number 3, Amanda Nunes, the double champ at featherweight and bantamweight in the UFC. Number 4, Triple C, Henry Cejudo up in there. And number 5, the 29-0 Sambo machine himself, Khabib Nurmagomedov, the Eagle, flying in at number 5.
All right, a strong list on the surface, but I have a feeling we're gonna start deep diving.
No peds here. No peds here.
All right, so we'll get to the list that's correct, and that is my list. All right, so from 5 up to 1, I have Daniel Cormier. Number 4, I've got Demetrious Johnson. 3, Anderson Silva. 2, George St-Pierre, and number 1, Johnny Bones Jones. Now, let's go ahead and start picking apart one another's opinions and hurting feelings in the process. So, Matt, now we'll go with you first, because you are the first person to mention Amanda Nunes in this conversation. I came very close to making her my number 5. Why did you have her so high on your list?
I had her so high on my list because she's beaten every other champion in her weight divisions in the UFC. Like, that's something that's just incredibly impressive to me. And not only has she just continually just dominated everyone, I mean, she's doing it to where it's like you expect her to win. Like, you don't expect anybody to compete with her. I mean, you go back to the Cyborg fight. That was the most recent one where everyone was like, oh, this is a huge test for Amanda Nunes, and starched Cyborg like nothing. So, I mean, you have to put her in your GOAT conversation. If she's not in your top 5, she better well be in your top 6. So that's my opinion on that. I mean, it's hard to not acknowledge her greatness, a 2-division champion. And really, there's nobody that we see on the horizon that can take those belts from her. You know, she's talking about just walking away because it's kind of boring to her at this point.
Drake, so you also included her in your top 5. What was your reasoning behind that?
I mean, yeah, pretty much the same as Matt's. You know, just she's looked so incredibly dominant against, you know, everybody she's fought for the most part, outside of, you know, some little instances. Of course, everybody's going to have slip ups, you know, for an instance in some fight here or there. But I mean, yeah, you just look at who she's beating, how she's beating them. I don't give her bonus points because she's a woman and what she's been doing for her gender is, a little bit unheard of and everything, but you just look at the quality and everything. The Cyborg one really puts her over a lot, I think, for most people and myself, just because, just with my entire list, everybody on it except for Demetrious Johnson, we got double champs here. I think the fact that, being able to win at the very highest level in the sport is a big deal in terms of showing how great you are. Of course, we can make arguments why it shouldn't happen and then why, some wins aren't as good as others and everything. But I mean, that's kind of, it's a very difficult thing to do, right? Of course, we've seen it more in recent years, but it's because people have gotten more opportunities to do it. And she's the only one to be able to do it. So, it at least among the females. So, just her resume, I think, really speaks for itself. And you look at the run that she's on right now has just been, something that it's going to be very, very hard to replicate, especially as the sport continues to evolve.
Definitely well said there. Like I can't argue with Amanda Nunes being on anyone's list. Like I said, she was dangerously close to replacing Daniel Cormier on my list. And I have my reasons for keeping Cormier there. I'm sure I'm going to get questioned about that. But maybe another question that should be asked of me right now. I'm the only person that did not have Khabib on their list.
Were you drunk when you made your list?
Quite possibly.
That was the.
You know what? As much as I acknowledge the greatness that is Khabib Nurmagomedov, I mean, I definitely say he's the best lightweight of all time. But I have a hard time considering him the absolute greatest of all time because I think he didn't do something that a lot of other people that we're talking about did do, and that's have multi-divisional success. I think that's a huge factor, especially when we're talking about pound for pound discussions. Pound for pound success, having success in multiple weight classes seems to fit that textbook definition. So he has not done that. Now, I think he benefits from retiring when he did because, he didn't have the chance to stick around too long and suffer some untimely defeats and kind of have that greatness shattered in our eyes, similar to BJ Penn kind of hanging around longer than he should have. So I think there's something to that, to having that Seinfeld type exit when you're on top, but we still don't have the multi-divisional success.
I think that, the point that you bring up right there for not having Khabib is why most of us, I believe, no Fedor mentions really here. And I mean, at a time, that would have been insane to say that before he came back for kind of this final stint. If he didn't do that, I'm sure we would probably still be including him here. At least, a couple of us. So I think, that's a great point to bring up in terms of these greats who have that fall off. It is very, very rare to see, what GSP has done, what Henry Cejudo has done, where they go out without, these bad exits or, what have you. So in that regard, I think that is worth mentioning.
One of us did mention Fedor in their list. And I think he still belongs up there. I feel like you can't look at the end of Fedor and say that the rest is gone because he stayed on too long. That happens to the greatest of them. You're going to tell me Muhammad Ali isn't one of the greatest boxers or the greatest boxer of all time because of the end? Have you seen Muhammad Ali's record towards the end? It's not pretty. It's not pretty at all. No, I don't know. I get that. To go to the DC reference though versus Khabib, because I kind of gotta ask Ann about this. So you got DC at 5, but Khabib's not there. But Cormier didn't win the belt against either of the best, and hold it there, right? He lost to Stipe twice. He lost to Jones. I mean, I don't know. That's better than Khabib in your opinion?
I think you have multi-divisional success. You have the Strikeforce heavyweight Grand Prix win. You have him running through the heavyweight division until he moves to light heavyweight, where he did give Jon Jones a tough fight at UFC 182. Obviously came up short there, but due to no fault of his own, the title opportunity came back around. He capitalized on it, successfully defended multiple times. Then something completely devoid of Jon Jones's legacy, he was able to capture the heavyweight belt and defend that. And then you look at his only two losses. I mean, the only two people he lost to are the two greatest in their weight classes. You only lost to Jon Jones and Stipe Miocic. I think if you are number 2 in 2 divisions all time, I think that puts you pretty high up on the all time list. So I think the sum of his career is probably greater than the parts at either heavyweight or light heavyweight.
See, I guess part of the issue I take with that is the strength of the divisions. And this is part of the reason why I was one of the few that didn't have DJ on the GOAT list. I think DJ is probably number 6 for me. But, you know, when you're trailblazing a division or you have a particularly shallow division, which both light heavyweight and heavyweight are easily the most shallow divisions probably in all of MMA, it's hard for me to look at DC beating Derek Lewis for the belt when Derek Lewis has like no wrestling whatsoever that could come anywhere next to DC in heavyweight. And then look at Khabib, who has beat some of the greatest in the lightweight division, in a division that is just full of killers. I mean, we're talking lots of depth. So for me, and maybe, I don't know, you could open up the forum to attack me for not having DJ on my list. But for me, strength of schedule plays a huge factor here. And Khabib at the end did enough with just dominating Gaethje, dominating McGregor. I don't know how you don't put him in that conversation.
Well, we can't talk about strength of schedule and disrespect what Cormier has done. Like we just can't do that. He has rattled off a string of top tier names, and I think we need to look back at the time that he fought Derek Lewis. Derek Lewis won like 6 out of his last 7 fights. You know, he came off of some stunning knockout wins. He was the rightful guy to be in that title shot at the time that he had it. And Cormier handled business. So I think that's more revisionist history to question Derek Lewis on, you know, during that run for DC. Like to say that DC didn't have, what was that, 2018, where he beat Volkan Ozdemir to reclaim the title, or I guess defend the title after the 214 incident with Jones. So he defeats Volkan Ozdemir. Then knocks out Stipe Miocic in the first round, and then submits Derek Lewis in, I believe, the second at UFC 230. So you're talking about one of the greatest years for any individual fighter in the sport. I think it's hard to look past that. And then you see what he did in Strikeforce. To see him pick up Josh Barnett and toss him like pizza dough, you know, at not too long removed from when he was considered, you know, a raw prospect, and this guy is out there handling former champions like it's nobody's business, comes into the UFC and does the exact same thing, and probably could have been the champion even with his close training partner Cain Velasquez holding the belt. Like, big question marks as to who would have won that fight. So I think that Cormier more so was a victim of circumstances as far as any knocks on his legacy. You know, in a world without Jon Jones, in a world without Cain Velasquez or Stipe Miocic, I mean, we're talking about easily the greatest fighter of all time. When you take out the couple chinks in that armor.
My issue with that argument is you're saying if potentially 3 other GOATs aren't around, he would be the GOAT. So that's my issue with the argument. It's because if you're saying Jon Jones, who beat him twice, I saw the second one. I was cage side for it. The head kick happened. I don't care what you say.
I was sitting beside you. Yeah,
I know. We saw it. He took a cold L to Jon Jones, got knocked off, and then of course the memes that follows, right? And then Stipe, another guy that could arguably be on these top 5 lists, definitely in your top 10 list in Stipe. So if you have two losses to GOATs, I can still see like those are very, 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 very high level losses, but it knocks you out of the top 5 for me if you have losses to two names that could be on the top 5 list.
But they're 2 names in 2 different weight classes. When you are the firm number 2 in 2 different weight classes, how difficult is it to be the firm number 2 in 1 weight class, and you were able to do it in 2? And he did hold the belt in both divisions and successfully defend it. Yeah.
I do want to say about the Derek Lewis thing, because you said he was the rightful contender. I do want to remind you, he was losing to Marcin Tybura till he got that knockout shot. He then had the lowest significant strikes thrown in heavyweight history against Francis Ngannou in a match I saw live, where we all held our phones up and did a little concert thing.
But a fight ridiculous. That he won, yes, continue.
I don't know how you give that a win to anybody, but fair. And then he went on to, again, throw a Hail Mary knockout punch that worked. I will give him that, but was 90 significant strike differential, getting the crap beat out of him by Alexander Volkov. And you're going to tell me that that's a high-level contender that's worthy of like planting your flag down? Like, I defended the belt against a worthy contender?
Hey, Pat, you forget. His balls were hot, okay? He did what he had to do in that situation. Derek Lewis earned his spot. Like, if you put someone in front of another man and you knock them out, you can't take that away. You know, even if the circumstances leading up to it were a bit dubious. I mean, out of everyone else in the heavyweight division at the time UFC 230 took place, who else would you have put in that spot? You might be able to come up with one or two other names, maybe.
Even though Daniel Cormier is quoted, and I quote, "I couldn't fight Stipe in the rematch. I needed more time for him. But Lewis, I could do that." You think that doesn't take away at all?
No, not at all. Because they're prize fighters and they're playing to strategy. Derek Lewis is a much more favorable style matchup than Stipe Miocic is, because of the lack of wrestling defense. You know, and that's fine. Fighters match themselves up like this all the time. There's a reason why certain fighters point to someone else and say, "I want that guy," because they see something in them that they think they can defeat. You know, that everyone on this list is guilty of that at some point in time. There's every single person that we mentioned on this show so far has done that at some point in time.
I don't know if Khabib has.
Khabib? You mean the man who very clearly knows he's going to ragdoll everybody by taking them down?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, what?
Well, he's always gone for the top contender. He's always about the top contender. That's my point. He's not saying like, I'm going to fight a dude I know I could beat.
Well, at that time, Derek Lewis was the top contender. It just happened to be a favorable style matchup for him. You know, this is one of those arguments where I have a hard time, you know, not getting riled up about, because like the people who discredit what Conor McGregor did at UFC 205 by knocking out Eddie Alvarez and like, well, he went after the weakest possible style matchup. That's the guy who was the champion at the time, so he went through him. Derek Lewis was the rightful contender at the time, so Cormier handled business. That's what the champion does.
I would say that Stipe was the rightful contender in a rematch because he had just broken the record of heavyweight defenses. That's advice personally.
I would say he wasn't, because the last time we saw him, he was asleep. You know, that, I
guess, but then DC should have got the trilogy. He should have been fighting his way back up the ranks. Yeah.
Well, I mean, but we're talking about a PED scandal right there, in which case the belt was kind of held in limbo. So we can look at that as a vacant light heavyweight title fight. That's fine.
No. I'm not talking about Jones. I'm talking about Stipe versus DC. When Stipe knocked out DC the second time, then DC shouldn't have got an immediate trilogy, right?
Oh no, he shouldn't have. Okay.
All right.
I think the reason why that happened though was more so the timing, knowing that he was going to retire, and you did have a trilogy that could decide, you know, all-time stakes. So it's okay to make an exception in that sense, but on pure merit, I understand that DC probably did not deserve to have an immediate rematch with Stipe.
It's interesting. You mentioned Khabib in there. You know, talking about his dominance and his just ability to just go out there and ragdoll anyone. How do you leave that name off of your list when you're a guy that knows what's going to happen? Like, everybody knows what he's going to do, and he's still able to go out there and do it. Like, this is the argument I have with myself internally, between him and Jon Jones being number 1 and number 2 for me, or number, you know, like top 3. You know, I kind of switched those names around a little bit, because there's two things when you consider Jon Jones and Khabib. Jon Jones is the type of guy that would go out there, obviously dominated people, but he would oftentimes go where his opponents are best, right? He would challenge himself to beat them at their own game. And I kind of struggle with, is that more impressive, or is the fact that Khabib is able to just go out there and ragdoll everybody and everybody knows what the game plan is and you can't stop it? I'm not sure which one is more impressive, but I guess for this list, I chose Jon Jones, being like, hey, I can beat you at your game sort of thing. But the fact that Khabib goes out there and everybody knows what he's going to do and you cannot stop it, like, that is top 5 worthy to me, top 3 or better to me.
I'm not going to sit here and, and point the finger at you and say you're wrong, other than the fact that you disagree with me, which inherently makes you wrong. But that's another story. I think that Khabib is definitely on the short list for greatest fighter of all time, but he doesn't make my top 5 because everyone else that we've mentioned here has had cross-divisional success. And that is so rare and so difficult to accomplish. I think that if he were to go up to welterweight, he would be very successful there. And this argument of mine would be completely eliminated. However, we have not seen that. Every single person on my list has been able to succeed in multiple weight classes. And Khabib does not have that. That is the one thing, the only thing that is keeping him off of my top 5. You're nodding your head as if I'm right.
No, it's a fair point. It's a fair point. But I mean, also, like, DJ didn't have necessarily like championship. Like, when we think of DJ, we're talking about his flyweight run, right?
We're talking about former bantamweight title challenger Demetrious Johnson.
Yeah, but what happened when he fought Dominic Cruz?
He lost that fight.
That's the other GOAT, though.
Is the greatest bantamweight of all time.
Hey,
but
I'm just saying.
He's still someone undersized, even for flyweight, and was able to climb that mountain.
But we're also talking about a 10-pound difference versus a 15-pound difference.
But we're also talking about bigger men. The difference is relative. We're talking about the overall body mass.
I don't want to turn this into the everybody versus Ant show.
Oh, please! I want it to be the everybody. He wants to smoke,
but
I want to smoke.
By that logic, then isn't BJ Penn getting a? I believe it was a split decision against Mauricio Hua at heavyweight? Isn't that a like?
There are legitimately some people that have.
Machida.
Yeah. There are legitimately some people that still consider BJ Penn, in that GOAT conversation. And hey, listen, stuff like that he did, you absolutely should consider him. And again, if you chop off the tail end of the career like you want to do for Fedor over there, then you can consider him. But for me, I'm a completionist. I'm a completionist personally. How did you end your career versus how you were in your prime? Everybody on my list, impressive runs through and through, and they're still going at it. We'll see what happens with Jon Jones, and this is why at this day, and as we close out 2020, he's still number 1 on my list. That could change if he goes up to heavyweight and takes a few knockout losses. So as of right now, I'm all about the complete career.
I'm all with you there.
Unless if you come back and it's like clear, like, hey, I'm not competing for titles anymore, I'm doing it just for a paycheck, something like that, then maybe. But all these other guys that are still kind of hanging around, like, they were very much trying to win titles again.
So I want to talk a little bit more about Demetrious, if that is all right, you guys, because Pat, he mentioned. Let's go after Pat here for a second. Pat mentioned the kind of the division that Demetrious had his run in, and I think that in hindsight, that makes it even more of a myth than it kind of already was, because Demetrious, I think the argument is there that he was just so good that everybody looked worse than they were. But you look at the division, even at the time, those guys were all very competitive with them. And you look at some of the guys that he did beat and where they are now. I mean, of course, John Dodson was always capable at flyweight. And then, goes up to bantamweight, was, floating around the top 50, not as good, of course. But, there was Joseph Benavidez, who, barely lost to anybody outside of Demetrious. The Sergio Pettis fight that he came back after the layoff from his ACL injury, arguably got robbed in that one. And then Davis and Figueiredo, of course, at the tail end of Joseph's career. But that guy, didn't lose to anybody but Demetrious and, Dominic Cruz at bantamweight, essentially. And then, Horiguchi on Demetrious's resume, who that guy's gone on to craft a very underappreciated legacy in his own right. More so at bantamweight now, but, in both divisions, Horiguchi is one of the better fighters that isn't talked about. Of course, there's some names on here that are a little bit, he ran out of some options. But, Henry Cejudo, who he defeated just really quickly in that first fight, just went right through him. And then even in the second fight, would love to speak about the second fight, because initially, when that fight did happen, I did think that, it was scored it for Henry. But then on rewatch, I had trouble giving him like 2 rounds. In the rewatch, I was like, this was kind of pretty clearly Demetrious. Like, I think the moment of seeing someone be even a little bit more competitive than these last 12 guys or so was what really kind of, got people like, oh, wow, is he actually winning right now? And maybe the judges even felt this as well. We've seen some very awkward judging lately from one person in particular. But, you look at Demetrious' run, and then now up a weight back at bantamweight in one championship and still doing just as good as he is, and about to get a title fight where he could add to his legacy even more so. I mean, you could argue that this guy has not lost since the Dominic Cruz fight, and then of course the draw with Uncle Creepy and his flyweight debut and everything. But I think it's always been a myth about, he was in a terrible division. I mean, you look at,
I hate that argument.
You could argue that for, plenty of people in the past. So, higher at like light heavyweight and stuff. But that's
just to add on to that real quick, as well as we're talking about, bad faith arguments for Demetrious Johnson not being in the top GOAT list or whatever. Take any long reigning champion away. Like, if Ronda Rousey wasn't the first, there would have been other champions there. Exactly. Right? Ronda Rousey was the first. Like, they literally gave her the belt. Here, it's yours. Take it and go fight. Demetrious Johnson was the first one there. He was in the first title fight, and he won and kept winning and kept winning and kept winning and kept winning. So how is that a knock on him that there were no previous champions? I hate that argument. And also, tell me this, please, someone remind me, when was the last time or other instance that an entire season of a reality TV show was set around finding an opponent to fight this man or fight any other GOAT? That doesn't happen.
Coached by 2 guys that lost to him.
Thank you. Top 5, dead or alive.
Yeah.
And also, just look at the performances too, though. I mean, I mentioned mainly the resume there, but you look at what he was doing in the cage and like just the skill that was on display. And I mean, arguably the most well-rounded fighter in, technically of all things, but he was doing, it's not like, we talk about revisionist history and everything, but people like to forget now that Davison Figueiredo is here and the champion who's getting these spectacular finishes. Demetrious Johnson was finishing people too. He wasn't some like decision machine. I mean, he put away most of his opponents, whether it was by submission or actually TKOs, more submissions, but
it was 7 out of his 11 defenses were finishes. Just nuts. Like the disrespect thrown his way on the broadcast of UFC 255, as if he just didn't exist. To forget that this man tossed a grown man in the air and armbarred him on the way down. Like, you just forgot this. You forgot that he need the chest of now someone who is worthy of GOAT discussions, and Henry Cejudo need his chest and made him quit within the first minute and a half of their fight. The disrespect toward him is absolutely ridiculous. And the fact that now he's in one championship doing away with fools again. And keep in mind that we're talking about true pound for pound success. They ain't doing no real weigh-ins over there in Singapore. This man is over there, pizza dough tossing, light heavyweights. According like that guys with legs bigger than him, and he's over there waxing the floor with him. This is GOAT material right here all the way. Pat, you look like you about to jump out that screen, man. What you going to say?
No, I mean, so these are all valid points, and again, he's on my list. But let me at least try and defend myself here. So, Matt, just by your logic, we're talking about Valentina Shevchenko being in the GOAT conversation in what, a year? Is that right?
No, she's top 10 for me already. Absolutely.
Okay, and I agree she's top 10 for me too. But it doesn't matter that she's just going through the flyweights.
Hey, listen. If she continues this dominance, and if we ever by some happen chance get another fight with her and Amanda Nunes and she wins that, Joe, she rockets up everybody's list. She absolutely should. But yeah, listen, I don't care if you're the first there. Like, I don't hold that against anyone like people do against Demetrious Johnson. If you can go out there and just continually dominate everyone, you're huge betting favorites, and every time you step out there and you go out there and do what you're supposed to do, and then even create highlights off of that, you deserve a spot on somebody's GOAT list. Absolutely.
I mean, so here's the thing. Again, I go back to strength of schedule. When you look at Demetrious Johnson's run, he's gone through some very notable names. Cannot deny that. My biggest issue with his run is, as Drake kind of mentioned, most of those guys didn't fight at flyweight or really stay at flyweight, right? Dodson moved up. Horiguchi moved up where he found his success. Borg moved up because of weight issues, and how good was he to begin with? Wilson Reyes, Tim Elliott, guys that are fine, but they're not exactly top level dudes that are now out here beating everyone and everything. If you look at his run against actual flyweights, Joseph Benavidez is the biggest name. Joseph Benavidez is the one where I say yes, great resume win, great person who stayed in the division and did that stuff. Other than that, he beat some guys that clearly moved up to 135 and found more success there. And, one championship, I can't really count too many of those wins right now based on who he's beaten. If someone that's not Drake, without looking it up, could tell me one person that he's beaten in one championship, then we'll have that conversation.
real quick, I do want to point out though that Horiguchi would probably still be fighting at flyweight if Ryzen had a stronger flyweight division. And you think about when he did fight Demetrious, he was 14-1 and was the Shooto champion. So that one's, I just had to argue that one a little bit.
And also, some of those names you mentioned moved up because they weren't going to beat Demetrious. They're like, I want to have a clear shot at the title, and it ain't going to happen here at 125, so I might as well just move up.
Yeah, like John Dodson left the flyweight division because he lost to DJ twice.
Yeah.
And this is the same John Dodson who knocked out the future bantamweight champion TJ Dillashaw. So let's not do the revisionist history. DJ is absolutely worthy of GOAT status. All right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, knock Fedor off your list.
Yeah. Yeah, like to question, like you're questioning Daniel Cormier's win over Derek Lewis, but you got Fedor who beat Zolzinho.
Fedor who was gifted a win against Fabio Maldonado.
Yeah. Oh, Maldonado, I don't care. I care about
absolutely gifted a win.
Yeah, it's like, come on now, fam. What we
no. I mean, after the Verdum loss, he starts to go downhill. Up until the Verdum loss, come on now. You're going to tell me about the first guy camp? Oh, I don't care if they're first or whatever.
That's where we cut off consideration for him. Is right there. That's his cutoff point.
Yeah.
I love it. Hey, if you're gonna own it, own it. I'm with you. If you're gonna own it.
I do not consider Muhammad Ali's last several fights as part of his boxing career. I know very few people that do, because otherwise he would be in the conversation, because he looks like.
The thing for me about Fedor, because I'm in the complete same line of thinking with Matt, where I think you have to consider absolutely everything. That's why, BJ Penn has just dropped so far off. Anderson Silva, if I considered him as is with the PEDs and everything, would have dropped a lot lower because of this recent stretch. But I did consider Fedor still for my top 5, because I do think that run he went on was just so ridiculous and so historic. And another thing that, yes, of course, he had some silly fights in there, but a lot of people who hate on Fedor, they say, oh, he didn't fight the best of the best. But you look at, he did beat a lot of former UFC champions and people who are definitely very good wins. So I do think that, of course, they'll run in quotes. It's still good enough to where I understand you arguing to have him on here. But yeah, for me personally, just the latter half just notched him down to get off of mine, especially with Khabib coming up. That really hurt his status for me.
I definitely respect what Fedor did. I don't think my son does, judging by his screaming in the back there. But I certainly respect what Fedor did. But I still think Stipe Miocic and Daniel Cormier are better heavyweights. I think their strength of schedule is a lot better. They face better competition. I think they had more complete skill sets as well. I'm fully in the camp that Fedor is the third best heavyweight of all time. I will die on that hill. So one thing I do want to mention that we all have in common, the one person who didn't go below number 2 on anyone's list, George St-Pierre. And I think this is someone that checks pretty much all the boxes here. Multi-divisional success, successful title run, someone who had a varied skill set, someone who could beat you at your own strengths or play to your weaknesses. I mean, this is kind of like the prototype of a perfect mixed martial artist. Pat, you need to redeem yourself somewhat. Please give me some of your reasons why George St-Pierre was your number 1.
I mean, George St-Pierre was my number 1 because, again, of what he was able to accomplish, avenging those losses that he did have against Matt Hughes and Matt Serra easily. You can throw in the two divisional champ there as well, although I don't hold the Bisping wing as high as many others would say. I know. But yeah, I mean,
consistent at least.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's for me though, that run though, and what he accomplished inside the octagon, the cage, is just unreal, and it's untouched. There's no PED scandals. That's I know we could get into that conversation after this if we want. Where I think I'm with Drake in that camp, where that's why I had to knock Jones down because of that stuff. But there's no PED issues. He won. And sometimes it wasn't the most exciting fight, but he won and he dominated. He's just one of the best all-around mixed martial artists. Retired on top. That does add a little cherry, I suppose. But yeah, I mean, he's just the GOAT. It's that simple.
Yeah, it's very, very difficult to argue against that. George St-Pierre has very few chinks in his armor. I mean, we can point to the losses to Matt Hughes and Matt Serra. Something about the name Matthew appeared to be his weakness for at least some stretch in his career. So I think George, Mr. Wells is directly challenging you. He says he is ready for the smoke. Bring it. Anyway, I think that we have to remember that George St-Pierre also just clowned the entire division for so long. And I think this is a similar conversation that we can have about Anderson Silva, although I think GSP did it better, where guys were coming up in training, looking toward George St-Pierre as the prototype, the guy that they had to beat. People who started training in mixed martial arts, this is the one that they aspired to beat. And then he stuck around long enough to fight some of those guys and beat them. To have Dan Hardy look up to George St-Pierre and really admire his career as he's beginning his mixed martial arts journey. And then lo and behold, he becomes a title challenger and then another victim of George St-Pierre. It speaks to greatness. It speaks to longevity, and he agrees. So I'm right.
No, 100%. I think the thing about GSP for me is the fact that, Pat kind of touched on it, the fact that he retired on top. That's so huge for me. And that's why the fact that he did that, came back, won another belt, and then rode off into the sunset again. That's GOAT stuff for me, because you didn't hang around too long to see people see you diminish in skill. They didn't see, there's no part of this thing where it's okay, I'm not counting fights after this point, like you do for Fedor, right? So there's none of that. There's none of that. And the fact that, to touch on what Ant was talking about, people were looking to his fights to take notes. He brought the MMA jab into prominence. He was the reason people have jabs in MMA now, which is crazy to say. But I'm talking about effective MMA jabs. He absolutely boxed the eye off of Josh Koscheck. That was just super impressive. And people were just wow, we never really see that in MMA. And it's a simple thing. It's a jab, but it's an effective use of it. That the way that he was doing it, people picked up on. Same as some of these other names that we're talking about. People, they watch their fights, they take notes, they go to the gym the very next day and try to work on their stuff, namely Anderson Silva, who I'm sure we'll talk about here in a second. But GSP for me, I can look past the losses because of how he improved from those points and the fact that he did things on his own terms.
Yeah. I think also too, one thing that we haven't really considered on this list a whole lot, but I think GSP deserves credit for this more so than anyone else that we'll talk about. And I'm sure someone is going to bring up Conor McGregor in this on the comments. So just preempt that. No, he doesn't belong in a top 5 GOAT list. But George St-Pierre, I think, is in an era where Reebok is the official outfitter of the UFC, and they have all sorts of blue chip sponsorship logos plastered all over the cage. You can thank George St-Pierre for a lot of that. He was the first fighter to bring in some of the major corporations to pay attention to the sport. An Under Armour deal, Gatorade, for instance. Like, he had these top sponsorships that normally go toward the more popular stick and ball sports. To have, Michael Jordan was the face of Gatorade until they decided to pivot toward George St-Pierre. Like, that's the level of popularity that he had and the sort of impact that he had on the sport. So I know that's not something that we necessarily considered, but I think you can't tell the story of George St-Pierre without telling the story of what he did on the business side, not to mention just the image of fighters. Where everyone else was wearing flames and dragons on their shirts, this guy had a crisp three-piece suit on and exuded professionalism that wasn't commonly associated with mixed martial arts. So I do think he deserves credit in many areas, but obviously just for his fighting alone, he deserves to be considered as the greatest of all time. Granted, my number 2, but man, he should be high up there. But I think I do think that we have opened the door up for the Anderson Silva conversation. So this is probably going to be a fun one. I think this is going to touch on a lot of things. Some of the same things we'll touch on with Jon Jones as well. But looks like I and Pat are the only people who had Anderson Silva in our top 5. I had him at 3, and actually Pat did as well. So Pat, I'll let you try to redeem yourself yet again. Because you've really been struggling today, buddy. So I'm going to help you out. Why is Anderson Silva on your GOAT list?
I mean, everything that Anderson Silva did up until that Chris Weidman loss right there is, it was flawless. It was unheard of. It got people invested in the sport. The Forrest Griffin fight alone perfection. Success at 2 weight classes, right? Went up 205, one of there too. I mean, that dude, when he was at his prime, was just always winning, finding entertaining ways to win most of the time. There are a couple, but most of the time, having some, great fights, doing stuff that looked like it was out of the matrix, just unique style. He brought that kind of taunting, that kind of, mess with your head style. GSP never did that, right? GSP just was like, nope, I'm in your face, I'm wrestling you, do whatever. He was a showman. That showmanship was massive. I think you saw that showmanship affect a lot of other fighters that then came up in the sport as well because it was so popular. To me, yes, he had his struggles at the end of the career. There was the PED issue that knocked, I couldn't put him above 3 because that did come out, albeit towards the end of his career, not during, more of the prime. But that all being said, he's one of the best to do it, especially in his prime.
I'm glad you brought up the PED thing, because of course that's going to be the biggest bit of contention when it comes to Anderson Silva being this high up on both of our lists. I'm going to bring up something that I talked about with Matt last night when we recorded a segment about TJ Dillashaw and the EPO thing. Although PED's straight up wrong, like that's not something that should be going on in the sport, at least by the rules. And we can have a broader discussion about the merits or dangers or our personal opinions on performance enhancing drugs and steroids and whatnot. But that's for another day. It is cheating. It is against the rules as the rules are set up right now. So definitely wrong. However, his PED usage wasn't something that directly affected his fighting style. We can look at the TRT Fedor run where he's just jacked up and it's just muscle upon muscle. His veins are bulging and he's just wide-eyed and crazy and he's spin kicking everyone to death. And you think like, yeah, maybe extra testosterone might have something to do with this hyper aggressive man in front of us, who has muscles coming out of his ears. But Anderson Silva's game was always based on timing and rhythm and precision, things that there aren't PEDs for. And quite frankly, before he got caught up in the PED scandals, I mean, he was a guy who stayed relatively injury free, and he gets caught up with the PEDs after shattering his leg. Now, I am someone who has suffered the same sort of leg break. I've broken my leg just the same way, and yeah, it's a challenging thing to come back from athletically. So maybe my personal experience has given me a little bit of leeway for him, just a little bit of bias on that end, and I'll happily admit to that. But I don't think his usage of PEDs, at least at the time that he was caught with it, had anything to do with what he was able to pull off in the cage, other than just being healthy enough to show up to answer the opening bell. And also, too, I think we're opening up a broader discussion on PEDs. Bless you. We're opening up a broader discussion on PEDs because we're talking about the crossover between the pre-USADA and post-USADA eras. When the athletic commissions, who pretty much suck at their jobs 9 times out of 10, where they say like the drug tests are pretty much IQ tests. Everyone can pass through those if you know what you're doing. If you do your math right, you can cycle through and not much of an issue. Having constant random surveillance the way USADA does it makes things a lot more difficult. Therefore, more people will be caught. But a lot of the people that Anderson Silva fought and fought alongside a lot of his colleagues, especially during the Pride days and as a member of the Shooter Box Academy, they were people that were fighting pre-USADA, so they weren't in this stringent drug testing program to even be caught. So I have a hard time just weighing the PED argument as the sole basis of someone's status. Yes, it can come up. Yes, it can be a factor, but it can't be the deciding factor when you look at the overall picture of what the sport was pre-USADA. Anybody want to challenge me?
No, I agree. I think it's all about when PEDs were found. That's my big argument against Jones, and my argument for Silva where he is because, as you mentioned, pre-USADA, it wasn't against the rules. It wasn't cheating. You could do whatever you wanted. Post-USADA, you get caught with it. That's cheating, man. That's how it goes. So with Silva in particular, yeah, it came up after he shattered his leg, not during his prime when he was, going through guys, doing the matrix moves. That wasn't, and as you mentioned, much more about timing and precision. Maybe that stuff helped him a little bit there, but still not to the level we're talking about with giant muscle mass, strength, that type of thing.
All right. So, any closing thoughts on Anderson Silva before we push things along here?
No, I just had to. Go ahead, Drake. Go ahead.
I think that, that is a fair point with the timing because, just to go back to Fedor real quick, that's the thing that people would like to bring up, even about GSP, like, oh, yeah, they would assume like, oh, yeah, he's probably on PEDs, whatever, yada, yada. But like, well, Fedor specifically, it's like, okay, well, it was encouraged a little bit, like, especially for him, in Pride and everything. They did not have any rules whatsoever against, even pre-USADA, there were still some, some testings and whatnot and suspensions and everything. Like we look at Sean Shirk and Josh Barnett, the guys who got busted. Hermes Franca got busted a couple times. Like it did happen. The testing just was not as nearly as strict as USADA, of course. So still cheating. People were it was a lot easier to not get caught. And in the case of like somebody like Fedor, it's, it was like the Wild West. So if you can't knock him for your assumptions there, let's say he did do it. Okay, well, in that situation, it's fine. But with the thing about the overall PED argument, the PEDs and everything is like, if somebody's willing to do it at all, like let's say Anderson, he gets caught at this later point in his career, what's to say that he didn't do it? And of course, what's to say he didn't do it earlier? Of course, that's assuming again, but it's like, I don't know, it just brings up way too much speculation for me. And even if it, like I said, it wasn't okay in the UFC, it was just easier to not get caught. The testing wasn't as strong. It was still illegal. I mean, we saw multiple times with it. So it just brings up, it's too gray of an area for me to even think we can play around with.
You know what's funny with the PED era? Like I'm I don't know. I'm of mixed minds of the whole thing. Because I think generally in athletics, in professional sports, period, there is a huge amount of performance enhancing drugs being used. You think about the amount of money that's on the line. You think about someone who's dedicated their entire life to excelling at this one skill, this one discipline, this one game. And the deciding factor is whether I need to stick a needle up my butt. That needle might be going up your butt. With millions of dollars on the line. So I do think that most sports have this problem. I mean, we're talking about people who race bikes are shooting up, and swimmers and track runners. And so if the consequences for not being the best means you get concussed and you get your arm broken, yeah, it sounds like a good time to start shooting at that good stuff. So I'm gonna just go on a limb and say 90% of professional athletes have some level of experience when it comes to PEDs. So I have a hard time, unless it's something just so blatant, unless it's something that, and also too, we have to assume that the richer the athlete, the more access they have to designer drugs that just don't get caught, that the science hasn't quite caught up to. So when you open up the speculation, to a point where you really can't comprehend what's going on. You can't really fairly judge anything. So that's why I try not to factor that in, but so much because the doors just open too much and we end up having such a broad conversation that really doesn't accomplish much at the end. With that being said, I think maybe this is a good time to talk about Jon Jones. I had Jon Jones as my number one, Matt as well. I see Pat had him at number 4. Drake, you did not include him. And I know you did say very clearly when your overall list was being read, no PEDs here. I don't know if you were joking or not, but that's a serious mustache and I deserve a serious answer. Explain yourself, sir.
Yeah, no, that's entirely the reason why. just the PEDs. And it's with a case like Jon Jones, okay? Of course, we just talked about Silva a little bit. With Jon Jones, okay, without even looking at the specifics of the stuff that he did and everything, just the fact that he's had so many instances, it's like, this isn't a coincidence, man. Like, you've had so many. It doesn't happen more than once to a lot of people, right? Of course, some people get busted for steroids multiple times. Like, we mentioned Josh Barnett already, at least I did. That guy just doesn't seem like he cares too much. Love Josh. He's a great personality and fun fighter to watch and everything. But the guy does not care, what he's doing in regards to that. We've seen him get busted at least like 5 times in his whole career, which is a lot. And Chael Sonnen, of course, another one who ended up giving up on that towards the end of his UFC run, caring about that. So yeah, with Jon, it's like, man, there's just so much weirdness about it all, and you look at just there's too much greatness to it. Of course, the guy, if I have considered like a PED list, if I was to ignore it, then yeah, Jon and Silva. Probably not Silva anymore because of the recent stretch. If we're looking at his whole career, not going to make my top 5 at this point. But Jon, yeah, you have to put him on there. If that's not a big deal for you, but for me, man, it's like, I don't know. You just look at just all these times that it's happened. It's just too much for me.
Fair enough. I mean, wrong because it disagrees with me, but fair enough. I'll just speak briefly to why Jon Jones is my number 1, and that's because pure talent. There has never been someone so purely talented, and I'll dare to say in all of combat sports. Just someone who, whenever their DNA was being constructed in their mother's womb, just turned into this perfect prototype of a fighter. We're talking about someone who literally learned how to strike watching YouTube videos and was beating people in the UFC like this. That's a level of talent that I don't think we really can quite comprehend. Someone who historically has been known to not train in between fights and would show up and annihilate some of the best of all time. Some people who might deserve to be mentioned in some of the conversations that we're having today. I don't think there's anyone. I don't think we've seen anyone, quite frankly, even in any other sport, that has that level of just raw talent that he's tapped into and just we haven't even seen what he's really capable of. Hopefully, the only knock I think on that raw potential is the time he spent on the shelf due to his extracurricular activities. Now, he might have lost some prime years potentially. We'll see what he looks like at heavyweight if that move actually comes to fruition. But Matt, I'll let you take the floor now. Why was Jones your number one?
For all of the reasons that you just stated. And the fact that, as I mentioned earlier in this video here, he would try to beat people at their best. And every time somebody, talked trash about Jon Jones and his opponent, and when they said, "Oh, this guy's so much better, he's so dangerous in this area," Jon was like, "Okay, let's see." Like, let's. Oh, Glover Teixeira likes to box in the clinch. He's got great dirty boxing. All right, let's go. And he would go there. He would go there and beat you at your best aspect of the game. He would try to go there and beat you at that. And he did it flawlessly. He's got the one loss on his record due to overzealous referee, where he was literally obliterating his opponent and did not get a warning for an illegal, 12-6 elbow, which should not be a thing anyways. So for me, in all intents and purposes, he is an undefeated fighter who has ran through everyone, with the exception of Alexander Gustafsson that one time where he was on drugs and partying and did not train. And Dominic Reyes. Yes.
Thiago Santos. Thiago Santos.
Yeah. Nah. So Dominic Reyes won. That is a good point. I did score that fight for Dominic Reyes. Okay.
Whatever. You know what? Even if you scored the Jones fight for Jones against Santos, he did not run through Santos.
He didn't run through Santos either. Okay, I walked back that previous statement, but
didn't run through St. Preux either.
Yeah, no, he didn't run through St. Preux either.
He ran through St. Preux.
He did run through St. Preux.
He beat St. Preux soundly. Yeah, I can't. He beat him soundly. That I will say.
Broke his arm. Like it was an easy win for him. It just wasn't as impressive as we were used to seeing in those previous fights leading up. Right. Jon Jones is just unquestionable to me to be the number one on this list again because of the undefeated record, officially, as we just mentioned. But listen, it's like Ant was saying, the skills. Where is he weak at? Where is his weakness? We don't know. We haven't seen it. I mean, outside of somebody just pressuring him on the feet and him kind of accepting that, when some of these opponents that we talked about that kind of pushed him to the limit, he could have at any moment said, "You know what? I'm going to switch up the game plan. I'm going to take you down." He's proven he can take down literally anybody in the cage. He can take down everyone. He could have taken Thiago Santos down. He could have taken Dominic Reyes down more, even though Dominic Reyes had some good takedown defense there a little bit. But he could have dedicated himself more to that aspect of the game, and I think changed the course of that fight. But we have to look at the results at the end of the day. That's neither here nor there. But where's his weakness? Somebody tell me, where is it?
His weakness is in his out of cage behavior. I think that's really the one true knock you can put on him. As someone who for I think his stretch of fights between the second Gustafsson fight and the Santos fight, I was cage side for those 4 fights in between, and in particular the Thiago Santos fight. Pat, I don't know if that was when we were in Vegas together.
Yeah.
I don't know if I told you this after the fight. I probably did. But I felt like Jones was playing games in that fight. That he decided, like, you know what? I'm fighting this guy who has this great Muay Thai just for fun. I'm only going to throw kicks and elbows just to see what happens. Against Anthony Smith, it was like, yeah, I'm just gonna throw punches, like only punches. That's really all I'm going to work on. I think Jones has been so dominant and so good that the times that things look close is because he just decided to challenge himself in a rather reckless way. Someone who would do coke and drive drunk just like a week before they're supposed to fight Daniel Cormier, and who'd be 3 weeks out from a fight with Rumble Johnson and be driving drunk home and get into a hit and run accident. The person who has that sort of reckless behavior would be the person to be in a cage fight with a trained killer and say, yeah, you know what? Just for fun, I'm just going to beat him with one leg today. That would be the same person that would do something like that. That same sort of just screw it mentality. that he showed. And even in a interview he had with, I don't know necessarily it was an interview, but a piece that Mark Raimondi did with him over at ESPN that just dropped, I think yesterday or today, where he's talking about his potential move up to heavyweight and the strength and conditioning he's been doing. He very clearly stated that he has been kind of bored at light heavyweight, like not feeling the challenge. So like he would train, but he didn't have that level of urgency to it, which kind of plays right into my theory that Jon Jones was in there trying to challenge himself because fighting trained killers just wasn't enough of a challenge. That's real GOAT stuff right there. That's something that the greatest of all time would do. If the greatest of all time has a bit of a screw loose as far as their behavior is concerned. I don't see how Jon Jones isn't the greatest when you look at the names that he has defeated. How many former champions does he have under his belt? I don't even have a count. Let me pull up his record real quick and we'll count. Or we could just do it off the top of our heads here. Rashad Evans, Shogun, Rampage, Lyoto Machida, Vitor Belfort,
Daniel Cormier.
Yep. That's, I mean, we don't really have to go any further. We might have missed a name or two, but we don't really have to go much further than that. That's GOAT status right there.
Yeah.
Who else has a resume like that?
You look at just the 2011 to 2012 run. That was just super impressive. And you wanted to kind of touch on a point that you made a second ago about just pretty much just kind of clowning around in there. The Thiago Santos fight. Like, if you go back and watch that, like, do you really think that he didn't notice that Santos' leg was messed up? Like, he made that fight what it was. Like, Jon Jones allowed that fight to be what it was.
I asked him specifically about that after the fight. And he tried to play it off, but he kind of, in his own way, admitted, like, yeah, I kind of knew it. When he tried to do that jumping side kick to the knee, like, just to see if he could do it, he knew exactly what he was doing. That guy is a savant when it comes to mixed martial arts, and that's something that I don't think we've seen before. We've heard all the stories about guys who show up in the gym and just kind of catch things naturally. We all heard some of the stories about Chris Weidman on the come up, that he was just this natural force. And we've seen what some fighters have been able to do on their rise. I think Johnny Hendricks, a lot of stories were coming out about him just excelling in training before he really got to it. Daniel Cormier as well. But we haven't seen anybody just go out there and do it like that, where they look like they're playing a video game with the greatest people at fighting on earth consistently for years.
Well, he hasn't done it consistently for years just yet, but you know where I'm going with this. This is CNN, by the way. Let's not forget. Hamza Chimaev, he has the early makings of that same look, but, you know, we'll revisit that 5 years from now and see if the trajectory is still the same.
Yeah. And I would say that, you know, it's hard for me. I get what you guys are saying, but I also believe that if you're going to mess around in a cage like that and you still put on a performance where I thought he lost against Reyes, and at the time I scored it for Santos. I haven't gone back and rewatched it in a bit. You know, that's, even if you are messing around, that's still, I mean, it matters what you do in the cage, right? BJ Penn is the name that you've mentioned. We haven't seen anybody like this. BJ Penn, 2 years to get a black belt, was at his height, was ridiculous at picking things up, but then also had problems outside of the cage, had a substance abuse problem, didn't really train, had a whole bunch of issues where Dana White is on record saying the greatest fighter that never was BJ Penn because he got in his own way. And ultimately what it comes down to is what BJ did inside the cage. So for me, the reason why I don't put Jones at number one, although he should be included in the list for sure, is because those last two performances were not great. You have the PED issue as well, but even if you take that out of there, those last two performances, even if he is just messing around, I mean, you can't be doing that. It's one of those things that diminishes it for me, because even if you're messing around, even if you're just playing mind games and you really are on this other level, if you don't demonstrate that in the octagon, what if he had lost that fight? What if the judges in Houston had made the right call and given Reyes the decision win? right? That's even if Jones comes back and says, "Oh, I know I could beat him this time," whatever. Okay, sure, but then why were you stupid enough to do that in the first place? I think all of that needs to be taken into consideration. So that for me is why I can't put Jones at number one.
You know what, Pat? Like, I've been calling for you to redeem yourself this entire time, and you've just redeemed yourself, sir. That was a great point. Especially when I think back, I scored the Reyes fight for Reyes as well. So I thought Jones should have lost that decision. But yeah, you put on a great argument, and if I wasn't me and so stubborn, I might be convinced. So fellas. Now, let me take a look back here at our list. I don't really think anything else stands out except for Drake. I do understand where you're coming from, but since you are the lone person to put Henry Cejudo on one of your lists, I feel as though it should be appropriate for you to take the stand and testify your case, my brother.
Oh,
raise your right hand.
I would like to. Can I answer a question though you presented before we go there about Jon Jones and who has a better resume? No, I'm not allowed. No, but who has a better resume than Jones and who has better names on it? I think that GSP is that guy. Clearly, that would be the best other candidate. And I mean, I did a real in-depth kind of GOAT study about who was on this list like 3 years ago, so a little bit out of date. But at the time, GSP had yet to come back. Of course, Jones had less fights. But at the time, when I racked up and did all this research of who had, like, among all these champions and everything, who had the most top 15, top 10, top 5, top 3 wins on like all the rankings that I could find, GSP, man, it just was not really close. When you look at Silva, Jones at the time, Demetrious, all these other people, and just his career, the generations of fighters that he beat, got in the UFC at 5-0 and then fought for the title, the 2 fights later or something like that, and just went on to do these crazy things and dominate people from there. Of course, he had the losses, but avenged them beautifully. And I have to point this out because it's one of my favorite stats, but in GSP's entire career, I believe it is he out wrestled his opponents in takedowns 103 or 108 to 10. So like collectively, his opponents only scored 10 takedowns on him to his 103 or 8, however many it was. And that's including the Bisping fight as well. So, I mean, it just to argue the resumes there, I think that GSP has the edge in most of the categories.
Not mad at that at all. Not mad at that at all. But Drake, I think it's time for you to take that stand. So you didn't raise your right hand, so I don't know if this is sworn testimony or not. All right, there we go. Proceed, my brother.
Okay, Henry Cejudo, man. What can I say? This was a little bit of a tricky one to sort out, this back end of my top 5. And the reason that he slides in primarily, I think, is because of his double champ status. And just you look at, really, of course, the latter half of his career is the most impressive part about it. But okay, so he lost, of course, to Demetrious Johnson in their first encounter. Terrible loss and everything. And then, he comes back, faces Joseph Benavidez in a fight that, that was a bit of an interesting decision as well. Of course, there was the deduction from the nut shot in the first round, which kind of really threw things off. But even then, it was still scored a split decision in the end, made him have to work for it a little bit. But then after that, it was off to the races for Henry. Just really came into his own and, took out Wilson Hayes, former title challenger, Sergio Pettis, then gets the win over Demetrious, who, even though we might disagree with it after the fact and everything, the fact that still a win on his resume and was able to be that competitive against that guy who is never, ever going to get enough love. Super impressive. And I mean, just if you're going to compare the performances from the first fight and the second fight, big props to him for making the adjustments that he did and having really some success at all. Cause he just had the takedown on the first fight, which was about all he did there. And then TJ Dillashaw, who he defended his title defense against, a TJ Dillashaw who was cheating blatantly. He starches in 30 seconds, of course, depleted at down weight and everything, but I think you kind of can cancel that out because of the EPO that was in effect there. Takes out a champion in a title defense. Very impressive. And then the Marlon Moraes fight, I think, is one of my favorite performances, and just in terms of underrated performances. No one ever really talks about that anymore, but you think like that first round, Marlon was just, he was on. Marlon showed up, and Henry was having some troubles, and the adjustments that he was forced to make in the 2 rounds that followed, and to get the finish, over a guy in Marlon Rice who was on his own tear, the former champion of the World Series. I just think that win is phenomenal. And then, of course, takes out Dominic Cruz, one of the other greatest fighters of all time. I think he is in the top 10. He was in my top 5 at a point as well, about the time I was doing that study I was telling you about, and finishes him, by TKO the first time that has happened. And we saw him get dropped multiple times against Cody Garbrandt. But a guy at flyweight comes up and who's known for his wrestling has turned into this finish machine where he TKOs these last 3 very legit champions. I just think performance-wise and the skills, the overall skill set that Henry Cejudo was able to, craft from coming from this incredible wrestling background, gold medalist, that alone, that's something, it's always a question mark how the straight-up wrestlers are going to do when they come in. But, he struggled a little bit early. I mean, he was still winning, but we're still not sure how he was going to do. But then by the end, he became one of the best, and a lot of people, I don't want to give him credit because he got annoying, which, in terms of business decisions, hey, good job, man. helped to get some noise and everything. But I just think, you look at the guys that he beat, and how he did it. I think that it definitely deserves recognition, and at 2 different weight classes. So it's enough for me.
Yeah, Drake, I can't disagree with a lot of what you said, and I think had Cejudo done that a little bit longer, then I think he'd be on a lot more people's lists. He certainly would have climbed up much higher on my list. It's just that greatness in Cejudo we saw for what, 2.5 years, fair. 3 tops. It just was over so fast, and quite frankly, I mean, he's probably going to come back. But if we're going to take him at his word, he is retired. And, no guarantees that he will be able to pick up where he left off if he does in that retirement, especially if his aspirations for 145 prove to be true. But I can't tell what's fact and what's fiction from him calling out like Ryan Garcia and some other silly stuff he's doing. Certainly one of the more interesting characters in the sport. But gentlemen, I wanted, is there anyone else that we don't have on our list that we want to highlight just briefly here before we get out of town? I'll jump on that grenade first. Dan Henderson.
Wow, Henderson before an Aldo mention.
Right? That was out of left field for me. Okay, go ahead.
I just thought about that because Aldo, we talk about Aldo in a lot of GOAT conversations. We do already, I think. Dan Henderson, I think, is someone who predated the champ craze, but he's technically the first when it comes to the major organizations. He's someone who also kind of had a rebrand in his career. He went from being Decision Dan to Dan that possessed the H-bomb. He's got the highlight reel. He's got the top level wins. A guy who he was like 45 or something when he fought Bisping in his retirement fight and was narrowly close to winning the UFC middleweight title. Someone who I think deserves at least an honorable mention. Probably realistically rests somewhere between somewhere in the top 15, probably when all is said and done. But I think he's a great guy that deserves some level of mention here. Matt, I'll leave the floor with you. Who's someone that you want to highlight as an honorable mention here?
Somebody that I want to highlight. I didn't include him here because it's still too early in his career, and he is currently in his way too early for that one. Way too early for that one. But he is in the middle of his run right now, so it's hard to evaluate where his place will be when it's all said and done. And I'm talking about Kamaru Usman. So the guy who's going out there getting wins over top contender after top contender. He's not necessarily finishing everyone, but he is dominating everyone. And it's looking like, who's going to beat this guy? I mean, he's got as of right now, he's got the fight with Gilbert Burns on the horizon. But, I mean, he absolutely put out hype train after hype train, whether you agreed with whether you were on that train or not, in Jorge Masvidal or in Colby Covington. And then what he did to Tyron Woodley to absolutely go out there and just shut down a guy that everyone was scared of. at the time. So he is a guy that is right off of my list that very well could be in this list when his run is done.
Very, very good pick. I thought you were going in a different direction there, but I'll spare that thought for the end because I have a feeling one of these other gentlemen will go in that direction. Pat, who's someone that you want to highlight as an honorable mention?
I'm going to leave that mention for you because I know exactly who it is. And I was thinking about it, but I have at least 4 I could think of. But in terms of the one that I'll highlight right now, it's between 2, but I'll go ahead and go the one whose record is more reflective of it, and that's Stipe Miocic, as you mentioned. I think if you look at his overall record after that second, Dos Santos loss, and then the fact that he lost to Cormier, but then came back and beat him twice, almost knocked him out the second time again. I think when all is said and done, I don't see too many challengers. I think especially if he gets past Ngannou a second time, the way Ngannou's looked, and then maybe Blades, I don't know how you don't look at him as one of the best heavyweights of all time. So I think he's on the cusp. And you could argue because of the fact he defended the heavyweight belt more than any person, he did go on that crazy run, of beating Verdum and Overeem and everybody over the sun to get to the point where he was fighting Cormier in a super fight because there was nobody left to go. I think he's right on the cusp. I don't think he's there yet, but I think he will end up in the GOAT conversation pretty much regardless, maybe top 10, top 15, even if he retired tomorrow.
All right. Not a bad choice there. Drake, who is someone that you want to highlight as an honorable mention?
Well, I want to mention Dominic Cruz, who I already mentioned, just an innovator, one of the lighter weight class GOATs. You look at what he did, his story, just all that he's had to battle through. I think really adds to his legacy from what it already is and what it could have been. But I will highlight none other than Megumi Fuji. I would like to highlight who, the foundation, the building block of the female fighters. Some people might equate her to Royce Gracie, but she was better than Royce Gracie in terms of an overall fighter. And, people want to say the women scene, really started with, let's say, Gina Carano or Ronda Rousey. But no, it goes back to Fuji, and you look at the run that she went on, which is something that is practically unreplicatable, if that is a word. You can't replicate that. 22-0 before she took her first loss, which was a robbery. And finished off 26-3. I believe I should know that, considering how much I've done on her. But Megumi Fuji, I think, is somebody who definitely is somebody, that deserves a mention in terms of the greatest fighters of all time. Maybe not the best, just all things considered. She was born too soon. Came onto the scene a little too late and everything, or just wrong timing. But a very important part of MMA history, I believe. And shameless plug, go check out Becoming Mega Magoo, the Megumi Fuji story, which I wrote in depth. So
what you're saying is, had her parents had their moment of lust just a few years later, we'd be having a different conversation. So
going right now.
Fine observation there. Fine option there. Make whoopee at the right time, ladies and gentlemen. That is the moral to the story. So I think we certainly can have this conversation all day, and I know we're going to revisit this. As you know, like, subscribe, share, tell a friend to tell a friend, tell that friend to tell 10 more friends. We talk about all the fun stuff that you want to hear about in the sport. Any comments, questions, concerns, to hit us up on our Twitter handles, hit the comment section below, and just follow what we're doing. So I'm Ant Walker. He's Matt Wells. He's Pat OJ, and he's Drake Riggs. Stay beautiful. Stay positive. Be a GOAT. Stay sexy. I'll see you when I see you. Peace.